Good morning. We are Hemshech Ayin Beis reviewing the conclusion. We're on page 1410. 1410. Discussing, as he called it at the beginning of this subtopic, subsection, if you wish, in Ayin Beis, on page 1408, he said, L'havin zeh ba'avodah. To understand that which we discussed before about neshamas and Torah, with neshamas being rooted in the highest levels, like the Etzem Chochma, which is not an er makabel at all. It's mashpia into Torah. And then there's the neshamas as it come down below, where they're like the riyah, the power of vision within the eye that requires a siyua, the support of an outside light. She said, translating that into avodah, again discussing with the pasuk, the operative pasuk is that the yidden neshamas are called ishin enoi, chelik Hashem amoy. They're called ishin enoi, the pupil of God's eye. And he contrasted that with malachim, angels, who are called Einei Hashem. Not the word pupil, but the eyes of God. And he first explained malachim, supervisors, shluchi hashefa, the messengers, the carriers, different words we use, distributors. As we're going to continue to learn, we'll see malachim's role in this whole process. And they are mutzayim, they're interfaces. They're not the source of the flow, they're not the source of the blessings, of the hashgacha, of the supervision, or of the chayis, or of the yediyah, the three things he said, but they're the carriers of it, and they bring it down into the specifics, like you would appoint a supervisor to watch over a group of, let's say, your workers, where you, the boss, can't be there all the time. Now with God, obviously that's not the case. He could be there and he can see it, but he wants it to be manifest in a way where there's a relationship between godliness and us, and we can relate to it and we can identify with it. So hence you have the malach. As he concluded in the end of the paragraph on 1409, malachim nimshach al yodam nimshach hashefa lekis l'chol nevrem b'chol elam lefi erkei mohusei. Through them comes the divine flow to all creations, all creatures, each world, each one commensurate to their tailored to their parameters and to their personality. Now comes neshamas. So now we brought another pasuk. Hashkifa mein katshacha ubarech es amchi Yisrael. So clearly he's talking about amchi Yisrael, and he's saying hashkifa mein katshacha. Hashkafa is hashgacha. It's gazing at. So what's unique about the gazing at the hashgacha over neshamas Yisrael, in contrast to other hashgacha, to the hashgacha of the rest of existence? So he explained there's two levels of hashgacha. One from Shem Elikim, which is, he first said, this is hashgacha from Etzem Chochma that's higher than containers. And then he explained, there's been hashgacha from Shem Elikim, that's from Chitzenius and Chitzenius HaKelim. Like he spoke earlier about the malachim, they come from the outer dimension of the container, they're rooted. And this comes through many mumutzayim, helam acher helam, all the way down from the malachim to the sarim, the 70 ministers, each one of noiga, that's mislabish and derech hateva. That's one hashgacha. The second is hashgacha from Shem Havaya, and that's higher. That's from Pnimius Ha'er and Pnimius HaKelim. And here, the hashgacha is not influenced by any garments or any levushim or any shifts. What he calls it, she'ena ba'adei mutzayim ve'ena misavim mizgashen klal. Doesn't come through any interface. It's like a direct. It's like the king himself is being mashgiach, and without being thickened or in any way congealed or concretized or becoming more connected to God, to substance, more tangible. And he brought from the Ramaz that the Ramaz says that there's two types of shefa, two types of flow. One is that come from above. One is to sustain and nourish the worlds, and that heiluch misav madrega, and that does continue to thicken and be affected by the mitzvah, by these pipes or by these channels that transmits. So that's what we call islapshus. That's where the channel itself affects the flow. And then there's a second Ayin Beis, derech ma'aver, it just passes through. The channels do not affect the flow. Ve'ena mismayet, ve'ena misave, ve'le misave. It doesn't get diminished, it doesn't get thickened. Mereish v'at safe. So you're getting a direct flow. One is coming through, one you could say like an express train and a local train. If you want to use a little, not exact example, but just the same idea. One is connected, engages more with the place that is mashgiach over, and the other is just passing through and goes straight from Shem Havaya. He says that's pnimius v'atzmus ha'er she'enim misav mizgash ve'enim mishtanim madregim l'adegim. And that's what's nimshach to neshamas Yisrael, because they come from pnimius ha'kelim and from pnimius ha'er, and their root, as we learned, is all the way in pnimius atzmus ein sof, as we learned earlier. But when we spoke about Tahiri, Neshamash and Asata B'Tahiri, all the way to Tiri law before the Tzimtzum, he took us all the way to Eir HaKol Bas Musei and Shmoy HaKol Bas Musei Helama Atzmi. Now, as I qualified on Friday, I'll say it again very specifically. This is two forms of flow. However, we're going to learn at length, relatively soon, that bottom line is when the Neshamas come down below, they are affected, the Hashpah. So there is an element of Hashgacha, and like I was going to say, in Zman HaGolos, we don't get this Hashgacha directly. That's why we're under the influence, and we are sometimes at the mercy of the nations of the world. And he's going to speak the difference between getting Hamshacha straight from Hashem and through Malachim. So, but fundamentally, Neshamas Yisrael are linked to that place. So this needs to be qualified how this applies itself. But there are these two levels of Hashgacha, and then we'll discuss how we access the higher level of Hashgacha, because as I said, Neshamas, as they come down below, are dark, do get concealed. They're not like the Neshamas as they are in their root. That was the big theme that he spoke about till now. That's why Neshamas are dependent on Torah to illuminate them, because they can't see on their own. An eye in the dark cannot see without an outside light, and we need Einei Ha'eda, and we need leaders. So as much as Neshamas are Ishen Einei, they're the pupil of God's eye, and they always remain so, but that itself can be concealed. So just keep that in mind. He hasn't said that yet, but he will talk about it a little later. Okay, that's where we're up to. I believe that's where we stopped. Oh, no. We went a few more lines. 1 second. Let me just finish the summary. 1 second. And he said, this is why Yisrael is called Ishen Einai, because that's the Ikar Riyah, the pupil of the eye, which is Gavoya Harbe from the Riyah de Klei Ha'ayin. That's much higher than a vision that comes through the eyeball, through the physical eye, through the eye, through the keli of the eye. Because this is the Er Atzmi of Er, what we called before, Er Hariyah Be'etzem. That's when the Neshamas are rooted. And that's what it says, Hayetzer Ayin Halo Yabit, that Hayetzer Ayin, the one who formed the eye, he himself for sure sees. Does he not see? But his Yabit, his Halo Yabit, Ba'atzmi Shaloyah De Ayin. The Yetzer Ayin is already what he shaped and what he created, an eye. So you see there are two levels. The eye has a limitation. And the Halayabit Ba'atzmei is Ariyah Be'etzem Ha'er. That's where we stopped. Now he's going to contrast that with Malachim. What is the difference between Isha and Einei and the Einei Hashem that the Malachim are? You wanted to ask something?
Yeah, so today it's only one dogger.
As I said, we'll learn it later. He's going to talk about it later. Not just today. Neshamas come down below. Remember, they are ultimately subject to levushei hateva. We have to go to work. We have to make a keli b'derech hateva. Fundamentally, be'etzem neshamas are connected to a place that's higher. But especially in time of Golus, as we're going to learn. I mean, this is not a chidush in Ayin Beis. This is basic. The difference between why do we, when Mashiach will come and the Geula will be here, obviously the garments or the channels that get concealed will be removed. But for now, I just wanted to qualify, because since he's saying there's two levels of Hashgacha, we have to qualify what he's going to say a little later and also consistent with what we learned earlier. There's neshamas below and there's neshamas in their root. Now, how
But
this
if it's
applies,
if
obviously, we can say Yidden are specially protected today. The Eibishter watches over them, even in Golis. And we see, like kifsa achas ben shivim ze'evim, one sheep, one lamb, or one sheep among 70 wolves. We've been protected, especially in Eretz Yisrael. This doesn't mean we don't have a special hashgacha, but it has to be qualified what that means. That hashgacha does have an element that conceal it, even though it's there, and ultimately, but we also, as I said, we are also subject to garments of levushay ateva to some extent. So we'll talk about that later. It's going to talk about it. This is a while from now, but it's going to be discussed. Okay. And remember, he's explaining again how it is fundamentally be'etzem. When you talk about if something is be'etzem, that neshamas are rooted higher than Torah, that's not negating that when they come down below, they still are subject to the fact that they need Torah, as we've discussed. So both are true. It's like saying every year has an Etzem Neshama, and a Yom Kippur or other times it gets revealed. But that's not enough. We know that has to permeate and now be integrated in our lives. So a person to say, hey, I'm all good. My Etzem Neshama is connected. What's our response? The goal is Etzem Neshama should come out revealed in a way that you see it on a daily basis in a consistent way. It would be like someone has a great talent. He's a genius, but he's not using it. Like the Alter Rebbe told one of the Chassidim who pushed him to learn because he had a great mind. And he said, Rebbe, because I can, anytime I want, I can become a lamdan because I have a good mind. So the Alter Rebbe said to him, just like a ganef is not someone, a thief is not someone who could steal, but someone who steals, a lamdan is not someone, a scholar is not someone who could be a scholar, but someone who is a scholar. So let's not minimize at all the need for it being actualized. So just pointing out the contrast. That doesn't take away from the potential or the etzem that's there. It needs to be now expressed, which is the whole goal. Etzem to come out begili.
but even lemato, it's still there is different. There is a isha in Einoi, like you said.
So we'll learn it when he's going to discuss it. We're going to learn it inside. So why jump ahead when the Rebbe Rashab himself is going to explain this? If you want to look it up, I could tell you. We learned it already, actually. The first time we learned, you want to look it up, I could tell you exactly where it is if you'd like. You want to look it up? Look on page 1444. That's where he starts talking. Well, it's even earlier than that, but start from there. That's a good place to begin if you want to get into it. Just for the record, since I'm summing up, I did just post, I think it was Yitzchak that asked about Koiches and Levushim. I was just happened to find it earlier in Ayin Beis. We spoke earlier on page 1409. Briefly, he was discussing the difference between eyeglasses and the physical eye, where one is a koyach and one's a levush. So there's two places in Ayin Beis that I just posted on the group where it's discussed in volume 1 and volume 2, if you want to see it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Now, unless anybody has any other questions, I'm ready to continue.
I had a quick question. The last pasuk or the last line, right before we're even going to start, he's talking about the hashkacha derech maiver, and the proof that, well, it says what it says, but zeh sheyisro nikra ishin eineh ki zehu ikar hariyah gavoa harbe b'madrega l'chinas hariyah. Okay, I'll be clear. I'm here. The proof. I don't understand how that pasuk, like, God's referring to God. He who creates, is it possible he cannot see? How does that relate to human sight?
Human sight is the ayin that he created. That's the lower level. That's the ayin and the keli. And his creation and the fact that he can see, he doesn't need an eye to see because he created the eye. So he has even a higher level of riyah. The source of, he's the one that created the very concept of vision. So that's a higher level of vision. He says explicitly, read the line. Halo yabe pish halo yabe ba'atzme shelo yayidei ayin.
Right.
The ayin is what he created. The one who created the instrument is definitely has the power that the instrument has, but it's on a higher level. Shehu raya be'etzem ha'ir. And that's higher than the actual eye. That's 2 levels of Riyah there. Okay.
Thank you.
So now we continue. Almost by the half of the page, on page 1410, Aleph Taf Yud. The pages, if you want to follow the text, can be found at ayinbeis.com. The line Chulu. So after Shehi Ariyah be'etzem ha'ir. Similar, well, it's not similar, it's exactly what he said earlier, that in Riyah there's 2 levels. There's the Riyah as it's in the physical eye, there it needs an outside light. There's limitations how far we can see. And then there's Riyah be'etzem koyach hariyah, doesn't have all these limitations, but we don't have access to that today. This is going to be very relevant to the concept ve'nenu me'ires kishemesh u'kireach, that we will reach once the eye is refined enough and we refine ourselves and become saturated and Elokus is integrated within us. So then, like in the Neshama, once it studies Torah and it receives the light of Torah, ultimately the Neshama will access, once you ignite and you can stimulate and activate, trigger the Neshama's root, then the Neshama will of course reach higher levels. But we'll get to that too. So now he continues and says like this. This level, he's talking about a second level of Hashgacha, what we call Ishin Einai, is higher than the eyes of Hashem that are 7. That was the second pasuk he brought earlier on the bottom of 1408 when he said about Malachim. He brought 2 psukim. One he brought was Meshetetes. One was Hashem Einav Meshetetes B'chal Haaretz, and then Shiva Hema Eini Hashem Meshetetim, and that refers to the Malachim. So now he's going to contrast this level of the eye, the Etzem Chochma, and the eye as it comes down into Kelim, Chitzenius HaKelim, Primis and Chitzenius HaOir, that is associated with Malachim, with Memutzayim, the Hashgacha that goes through their channel. So he says like this. So this is higher. This level of the Chochma Etzem HaOir is higher from Shivim. Shezeu mebchina Zayin Tachtenis de Zoh. If you recall, now he says clearly that it's Zayin Tachtenis. That's the 7. Remember, I wondered whether Zoh usually is 6 Midos, and Malchus is separate. But sometimes Zoh, even though technically it's the 6, in general terms, you could include Zoh as all 7. Here, of course, Zayin Tachtenis de Zoh. Here he says clearly, the 7 lower spheres of Zoh. So that could either mean that in the 6 Midas itself you have 7, which is like Malchus within Chesed and Malchus within Gvura, and Malchus within, or not individually, but Malchus within the category of Zoh. Or you could say Zayin Tachten is the Zoh, which is most likely, let's stick to that interpretation. I don't want to go into the other one, it's a little complicated. So this Tachten is, that's what makes them 7. Remember, we learned earlier that on bottom of 1408, he said the 2 eyes is Chochma and Bina, and he gave 2 interpretations, Beis Einayim, Chochma and Bina, Heichsadim Heikvurus, or Netzach HaHeid of Chochma. But the Shiva Einayim, he brought from the Ma'er, that is the 7 Midas, which is Shiva Einayim, bottom of 1408. Then on page 1409, he also said that the Einayim of the Malachim comes from the level of Zoh. Just looking exactly where he said it. Yeah, he said Zoh Atzilus is Einei Hashem.
The Zoh is not Shiva.
Emchin Sakelim, the Zoh, the Atzilus, that's the Einei Hashem, and that's where the Malachim are rooted. Sharshei, Malachim is in the Kelim, the Chitzenius HaKelim of Atzilus. And specifically the 7 levels. So this is not the higher level of Riyah. This is already as it comes down, like he said, Zayin Tachten is the Zoh. That's what he's saying right now. Zayin Tachten is Atzilus K'moshe Kosu b'Zeyar. Vayechi, Dafresh Mem Aleph Amar Aleph. He says in Zohar, first volume, Vayechi, page 241a, the Sham Hu Inyan HaKelim. Okay, well, one step at a time. The Zohar says that. Interestingly, before when he brought the Ma'ir he didn't bring the Zohar. It would seem like it would go there because it goes hand in hand with the Ma'ir. But regardless, he says it now. And that's where they're the Kelim. Because Zohar, Midos, is already a place of Kelim. Midos is already a relationship with another. So we're talking about Eris and Kelim. And especially, so the 7 levels, the Shiva Enayim is the Enayim as they're connected to Eris and Kelim. Remember, the higher level of Ashgacha that he called Ishen Einay is Eir L'mayla Mekelim. So keep that in mind. So Shamuin HaKelim.
He's not saying Eires.
One second. Let me just finish. Let me finish, then I'll take questions. Va'ariyah the Ishen Einay, and the vision of the pupil of the eye, which refers to Shamas Yisrael, hu b'chinas riyah de Chochma. That's not from Zoh, the Midas. This is the riyah that comes from the level of Chochma, which is higher than the Midas. Like he said earlier, Chochma Bina. Right, it says Vayar Reishis. Reishis always refers to the first, which is Chochma. Shesham Ikar Ariyah. Like he said before, Halo Yabit, that the Ikar Ariyah is from that place, because that's the primary source of the Riyah. Where does vision come from? Is from Chochma. And we know Chochma is higher than the vitality of existence, which is, as we said, was already the Hashgacha as it relates to Elamus. That's the Malachim, that's the 7 eyes. He doesn't say Torah, but he means Alpayim Shana Kodma, Alev Chachma, Alev Chabina, Alpayim is Chachma and Bina. So this precedes existence. Kodma La'ela. V'hainu, Pchinas, Primis HaChachma, and now he's teaching us not just Chachma, but the inner dimension of Chachma, Pchinas Mochin the Abba Shalamayla Mishtalshlos. The cognitive or the intellect of Abba being Chachma, the father, Imo is Bina, which is higher than Ishtalshos, relatively speaking. Midos, we know, is already engaging. Eilim Chesed Yibana is how the divine Elokus and Atzil is already relating to existence. And Mochin, we know, is to yourself. You don't need others to contemplate, to use your mind. So what is it in Ruchnis? Is the Elokus that's higher than Ishtalshos, meaning higher than Kelim. Okay. So now we have the contrast of the 7 eyes in contrast to the pupil of the eye, which is Einay, which is talking about Neshamas Yisrael, Ishen Einay. Any questions?
What is Zayed Tachtoino is the Zoh? Zoh
I just explained.
I
Zoh
know,
is an entity of 6 midas, and there's Zayin Tachtoino. Everything has a scholars. There's Gimel Rishonis, would be Chabad, Chochma Bina Das, or Keser Chochma Bina. Zayin Tachtenis is the 7 midas, meaning everything from Chesed through Malchus in Zoh itself.
Okay, so it's Zoh and Malchus. And also, what is it saying? Sham hu inyan HaKelim.
Sham and Malchus, I just explained. I just explained. In Midas is where Kelim become very prominent.
Okay, and the Eires are not in Midas.
In Mochin, it's more Oir. And in Midas, according to the Arizal, is Mochin and Midas. That Alter Rebbe teaches it's Eris and Kelim. Chassidus is Metavach, because in Moyach, the Oir is more dominant and the Kelim are less. Midas is where Kelim become the Ikra Kelim. Yeah. Ubezoya Sham, he continues now, we continue learning. In the Zohar Vayechi that he quoted, that he cited a bit earlier, a few lines, it says like this: the Shivei Eine Hashem Hein Sanhedrin. Okay, now he's going to reconcile this with what we learned earlier. Remember, we learned when he started the topic of Eine Ha'eda, bottom of 1399, Aleph Shin Tzadik Tes, he said Sanhedrin are called the Eine Ha'eda, the eyes of the community, of the people, of the Yeah. And he continued to explain from the Zohar Vayakel, just as the eyes are the guide that guides the entire body, the whole human being, where to go and how to travel, how to move. So do Einei Ha'eda, the leaders of the community, which is like Sanhedrin, are the ones that guide us. And we learned later that they guide us with Torah Ur. And the Shamas below need that guide. That's why we need Sanhedrin. We need our Talmidei Chachamim, and we need to guide us in the path according to the light of Torah. Now he began learning that the eyes referred to Ishen Einei, the Neshamas, and Einei Hashem was the Malachim. So he says in Zohar, he adds now that we say Shiva Einei Hashem, the 7 eyes of Hashem, refers to Sanhedrin, Einei Ha'eda. So we'll see how it all comes together. So he's going to basically explain, briefly, I'm just summing up, that Sanhedrin in general is like the Malachim in a way. Not exactly, obviously, the same level, because Sanhedrin are human beings, neshamas begufim, but relatively speaking, they are already a type of mimutza. You're going to a leader, you're going to a sage, you're going to a rav, to a scholar, to ask him direction. You're not going directly to the source, meaning to Hashem himself. It's through the Einei Ha'eda. But he's going to explain that in Sanhedrin itself, there's a thing called Muflah Shebehem. He's going to talk about the Muflah, the Muflah Shebebezin, which initially, in the time of Moshe, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. So in Sanhedrin itself, the leader of Sanhedrin, the Muflah means the one that's above them all, is the level of what we're talking, Ishen Einai, like the level of Chochma, in contrast to the Zayin Tachtenis. So the Shivim Sanhedrin, the 70 people in Sanhedrin, the Shivim Skenim, like we learned earlier about Atzilus, Vatzalti min haruach asher alecha, Hashem imparted from the spirit of Moshe into the 70 Skenim. These 70, as we're going to explain, is 7 times 10, is the 7 eyes. That's Sanhedrin. And Muflah Shebehem, the 71st, like the leader, which is Moshe, is the higher level of Riyah. That's what he's going to explain now, based on the Zohar. So it all obviously consistent to what we're learning here. Bottom line is, as we're going to learn later, we need all this. All the support we can get, we need. The support of the angels, Shluchi Shefa, the support of the Einei Ha'eda, the Muflah Shebehem, we need it all. But obviously, like we've discussed many times in Ayin Beis, as an interface, there's the energy, the divine energy as it relates to us, but then it's not as pure, it's already diluted to some extent, or miskashim, misava misgashim, the mila that it has, that it relates to us. So it's commensurate to us, and therefore it's going to be integrated, which is critical. On the other hand, we want to have a connection to the divine that's beyond us. That's going to be the level of Ishen Einai, of the Muflah Sheba Sanhedrin, or ultimately the Neshamas as they are in their root, which is higher than Kalim. But we need Eris and Kalim, because the whole goal of the interface is to integrate the divine and existence. Remember, that's the central theme of the whole Torah, frankly, all of Chassidus, and especially Ayin Beis. So right here, we see the Mamutza playing itself out in the concept of Hashgacha, because someone could argue, why do you need the lower level of Hashgacha from Shem Elokim? Let's just have the higher level. So he made it clear in the previous page, because the Erev was coming straight from that higher place and not going through the Kalim, it's not commensurate to us. So then it's like, it's missing the most important point, which is integration. To make a dir b'tachtenim, a home in tachtenim is on our terms, not just on God's terms. So we need to have both. You want to have our terms, and you also want to have God's terms. I'm sure you're familiar with this discussion because I've spoken about it hundreds of times, because this is the central point of the interface, both Mamata Lamaila and Mamata and Lamaila Lamata, through Tefillah and through Torah, which of course is the broader theme of this whole piece that we're learning. And ultimately, we're going to see how they both come together in a full symbiotic unity of Yehuda Tata and Yehuda Ilah, and the joining of both of them. But one is on our terms, one is on God's terms. That's how it begins. And then ultimately they will join together
No,
in
I'm
one
giving him soon.
seamless unity, ultimately. So just a few words about that context. So now we'll learn about the Sanhedrin.
So in the Zohar, he said that the Sanhedrin are the Shiva. Before he said that Am Yisrael is higher than the Shiva, much higher than the Shamas.
The
It's
Shamas
not a
are higher than
contradiction.
Sanhedrin.
Higher than Sanhedrin?
Why
The,
not?
the Sanhedrin are the Shamas also, are the Shamas and
No,
But
Goy.
he's not
he
talking
means
about the
that
Sanhedrin as Neshamas. He's talking about Sanhedrin as Talmidei Chachamim, as sages. Okay. As sages of Torah. Torah is illuminating the neshama. This is how the neshamas receive from them. Ubezei Hashem, the Shiva Eine Hashem Ein Sanhedrin, Eine Ha'eda. Shehein Zayin Midas Kol Echad Klula Me'eser. So what makes it 70? Because it's 7 times 10. Each one encompasses all 10. Which makes sense. He's going to explain soon why is that different than the Malachim that are only 7. That's only Zayin Tachtenis of Midas, because he's going to explain Sanhedrin is higher than Malachim. Because Sanhedrin also includes the Chabad Shebezah, because they are Torah. They're Torah. They are the guides of Torah. You're going to say that on the top of the next page, I believe, if I recall correctly. Or maybe even here soon. I don't know. I remember he's going to say it somewhere for sure. I remember from last time. So bottom line is that it's 10, the 7, each one encompassing 10 spheres, including Chabad. Not just Zayin Tachtenis, also Gimel Rishenis. Makes it 70. So now he's going to explain how do we, correct. Well, it's not a question really. It's just connecting everything together here. V'hinei b'Sanhedrin hoya Muflah shebeSanhedrin. Sanhedrin also had the Muflah shebeSanhedrin. Muflah literally comes from the word Pella. Muflah means the one he rose above them all. He's like the leader. So there was the one that always was like sometimes they call it the Av Bezdin. Sometimes saying a Bezdin of 3 or of whatever amount, a Bezdin, you have the Av Bezdin. Av Bezdin is like the senior rabbi, so to speak. But Muflah Shebet Sanhedrin is even a higher level, Muflah. That's what it's called. Keneged Moshe. So the Skenim, the 70 sages in the time of Moshe is like Sanhedrin. And the Muflah Shebet Sanhedrin was the 71st, was the one individual like Moshe in the time of the Skenim. Keneged Moshe. Ukadisa b'Mishnah Peda Gimel the Sanhedrin and Mishnah Vov. It says in the Mishnah in chapter 3 of Sanhedrin, 6th Mishnah, Sanhedrin Gdei Hoya Shal Ayin Aleph. There was a great Supreme Court, Sanhedrin Gdela, that consisted of 71 sages. Shenemer, and how do we know that? From the pasuk in Bahaleischa. Osfali Shivim Ish, U'Moshe al Gabeim. Gather, Hashem said to Moshe when he asked, Ma'ayin li basar. So Hashem said, gather the 70 skenim, Shivim Ish, the 70 men, U'Moshe al Gabeim, and Moshe was above them. And that's when Hashem said, I will impart from your Ruach, V'tzalti min Ruach she'alecha, on them. So they become, so to speak, ordained by Moshe Rabbeinu. We learned this earlier on page, I believe it was page 1401. If you remember, we talked about the Shivim Skenim. That was like when connecting it to Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, that Moshe had that clarity. So on Aleph Tov Aleph, if I recall correctly. Yeah. And he actually said that it's Mochin Shebe Midos. That's the 70 skenim. Mochin Shebe Midos. The Salt Min HaRuach. So what we're learning here is somewhat connected to what we learned back on page 1401. There was a different context. There was more the context of drawing down from Chochma Stima into Chochma Gluya, Torah Shebiksav, I believe, into Torah Shebal Peh. Yeah. So it's connected, obviously, because it's Torah. End of the day, Sanhedrin represents Torah. Okay. Moshe al Gabein, v'hu hanikra Muflah shebebezin. And he's the one that's called Muflah shebebezin. Then he brings from the mission in Midos, who talks about what happens when there was no Muflah shebebezin. They didn't always have one. Time of Moshe, obviously, they had one. There were times they only had 70. They didn't have the 71st. So Midos, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Daled, he brings a scenario, Oy, Shaloi Hoya Muflah shel Bezin Sham, She'en Zehira. He discusses that not all laws could be established if you don't have a Muflah. First of all, you don't have an uneven number, an odd number. So it could be a hung Sanhedrin. 35 say this, 35 say that. So the 36, the 71st allows for there always to be a majority. But it discusses there more in detail. Now, without the Muflah, there were things that they did not give Hayra. In other words, a Muflah, a shlemus of Sanhedrin was 71. Even though there were times that there were only 70. He talks about that in Midos and Sanhedrin, the mission that he's bringing here. But regarding our discussion here, he says like this, Inyan. What is the Inyan of this? What is the significance of this? So he says like this. The Ayin Sanhedrin, the 70 members of the Supreme Court, we'll call it, of the Sanhedrin, Hein mebchina zayin tachtenis, shekol echad kol miyud kanal. Their level, where they draw from, is from the 7 lower spheres, each one encompassing all the 10 spheres. So you have to keep in mind, let me just explain for a moment. Even though there are only 10 spheres, like it says in Sefer Yetzirah, 10 and not 11, 10 and not 9, but there's the concept of iskalulus. They're not 10 compartmentalized or fragmented entities. Think of the human body. The human body has many different limbs and organs. Ramach Evarim, 248 organs or limbs. And yet, they're very different. The mind, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the bladder, they're different functions. And yet, we don't say we're a composite of 248 parts. It's one body in a healthy human being, and they all work together. Not only do they work together, they are biskaulus. There's an interconnectivity between them. So any healthy functioning entity is not just singular entities that are just joined together. They have what Chassidus calls hiskalulus. So in Toihu, it's called Amfin Mispardin. Separate branches. And that's why it didn't function. It wasn't a functional world. It isn't a functional world. Why? Because it's like having disparate forces, all holy forces, but they're not really working together. We learned a lot of this at length in volume 1 about Toihu. Tikkun, on the other hand, is the name Tikkun. It's a balanced world where things work together. It's not cooperation, interconnectivity, skalulus. So if you really want to understand how Chochma, Bina, Das, and all the way through Malchus work, you can't just understand them as individual entities. You have to understand within Chochma, there's a Bina within Chochma, and there's a Das within Chochma, and there's a Chesed within Chochma. That's why in Sefirot Seimer, we don't just say Chesed through Malchus. There's Chesed Sheba Chesed and Gvura Sheba Chesed. Because when you really break it down, Chesed is an entire world of its own, and you need to have a Chesed within Chesed, a Gvura within Chesed. So though the 10 spheres are still the main building blocks, not the main, the only building blocks, but they interact and interconnect with each other, and that's what we call the skalus. So the idea, and the different structures, the different skalus. Sometimes you'll talk about the 10 spheres within Chochmah. Sometimes you talk about the 10 spheres within Bina or within Chesed. Sometimes you talk about the Zayin Tachtenis within Chochmah. So you're not talking about Chochmah Bina Das within Chochmah. You're talking about the Midos within Chochmah. Sometimes you talk about the Mochin Sheba Midos. So sometimes it's 10 within 10, that's 100. Sometimes it's 7 within 10. Sometimes it's 10 within 7. That's what he's saying here. So it's the 10 spheres that are within the 7 eyes, So basically, the 10 spheres within the Zayin Tachtein is the Midas, the 7 Midas. Malachim, we said, was just the 7 Midas. We'll soon talk about that. But Sanhedrin, he's saying, is Zayin Tachtenis, shekol echad kol miyud. Canal. That means Mochin sheba Midas. Because Midas is the direction, if you remember, we learned at length that Midas is chesed gvura, what is right, what is wrong. The Torah gives us Isser v'heter, it gives us Tameh and Tahir. That's all the Midas. Midas also doesn't just mean emotions, and Midas also means application. Midas is like direction. Midas is like an inclinations. But who's guiding these midas of Torah? Who's guiding these measurements, so to speak, of Torah? Midah from the word measurement. That is Mochin sheba Midas. That's the sages who know how to interpret Torah. So the Sanhedrin sit and they discuss a topic, and they come back and they say, after deliberation, this thing is permitted, chesed. But who guided the chesed? It's Mochin. The Mochin, Chochma bin Adas, that they used, that's what Sanhedrin. So essentially, it's not just semantics, and it's not just a Kabbalistic reference. Mochin sheba Midas is actually what Sanhedrin does. They use their objective minds, their knowledge of Torah, to determine what the Midas should be. Should it be, is two people, someone is standing in front of the Sanhedrin. They say, some people accuse them of a crime. And the Sanhedrin deliberates, and they come back after listening to witnesses and observing evidence and deliberating on it, and they come back, they say he's acquitted. That means chesed, he's free. Or gvura, they say no, he's guilty. But who determines chesed and gvura? It's not coming from a whim, it's not coming from an impulse. It's not an emotional decision, it's a decision based on Mochin. That's the whole point of Sanhedrin, that they are objective, and if they're not, they have to recuse themselves. They're objective arbiters who are going to look at the picture and treat it fairly. And if it's two people, both of them will be able to give equal testimony, and all the laws that the Torah is so meticulous about to make sure it's a fair trial. And Sanhedrin will listen to everyone, will deliberate on all the details, and then come back and say, Mochin will direct Midas, as opposed to someone saying, hey, I think he's guilty. He looks guilty. That doesn't work. It can't be based on emotions. It has to be based on Mochin that directs the Midas of halacha. So essentially, therefore, the number 70 is actually quite a profound number in that sense. It's not just around, it could have been 30 and 31. Why 70? Why not 90? Why not 15? Or whatever the number. Because it actually reflects the Mochin sheba Midas, like he says, which is exactly the function of Sanhedrin. Now, what about Moshe? What's Moshe's role in all of this? This is Sanhedrin. So you're now going to describe Moshe's role. But let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything before I continue to Moshe. So he says, Moshe hu b'chinas atzmis ha'chochma. They are Mochin sheba Midas, the 10 within the 7. That's 70. Moshe is atzmis chochma. Like he said before, Pnimis Chochma, the core of Chochma. And what is his role? So he doesn't spell it out here, I think, explicitly, but let me just say it in practical terms. I think we could understand what his role is. Ultimately, having a Moshe is like almost like a reality check, because he's directly linked to the source. The Sanhedrin are more engaged with the situation on the ground. Like we spoke about the difference between Aaron and Moshe. Aaron was like a man of the people. He was involved with them. Moshe was more like the man of God on the mountain, so to speak. So obviously, Moshe was involved in so many ways, and he was the source of all the hashpahs. But indeed, let's go back to Parsha Ba'alescha. What was the role of Sanhedrin? Why did he need 70 skein? Why couldn't Moshe just give them basar, meat? What does it mean, ma'ayin li basar? At the end of the day, everything comes through the Nasi Hadar, the leader of the generation, and that's Moshe. So actually, the whole concept of Atzilus in Kabbalah and Chassidus is taken from that story. What is Atzilus? Why does Hashem need Atzilus? Hashem could run the world without Atzilus. The answer is because, again, he wants it to be in a way that we can relate to it. and that we can retrace the steps. So Atzilus consists of 10 spheres, Eidus and Kalim. The Hashgacha doesn't come just from the bird's eye view. It's engaging with existence. Atzilus in turn will inform Bria, Yetzir, Asiya. So the same thing here. When Moshe said Ma'en Basar was because Basar is a material thing, meat. Why are you coming to me? You want Torah? I'll give you what Hashem wants. Why you get talking about meat? So you would think that Moshe Rabbeinu only gives the Jewish people, the nation, Ruchnius, not Gashmius. Hashem said, no, we're going to create interfaces. You'll have 70 Zkenim who will serve under you. Obviously, you're their leader. But they are bringing the hashpah that you are giving. That's what salti min haruach. I will take from your spirit, which is atzmis chochma, and we'll soon learn even deeper chochmas timah, which in a way is removed from existence, but not completely removed. And from chochmas timah will be mamshech to Mochin, in turn Mochin shebe Midos, and the Sanhedrin will serve essentially like instead of the king himself having to go bring everyone a meal, steak, that they will ones that will be mamshech. So Atzilus is essentially the process of how the Chachamim, the Sanhedrin or the Zkenim, are receiving from the source, which is Moshe, who in turn receives from Hashem, but it's now being channeled in a way that they can apply it and relate it to the people on their terms. What Moshe was saying is, we're far removed from Basar, but the people need Basar. So it's going to come from Moshe, but it will come through these interfaces like Sanhedrin. Similar to what we're speaking about Malachim. Obviously, this is higher level, because we're talking about in Atzilus itself, Sanhedrin. Malachim is already in lower levels than Atzilus. They rooted in the Kalim, Chetzenis Kalim of Atzilus. But it's the same idea, the idea of taking Hashpah, that first is in a much higher level, an ethereal level, like he gave the whole mashal. Remember the mashal of Riyah. He said, Eira Riyah itself, without a body, only sees spiritual things. It's when the soul goes inside the body, and the power of the soul's vision enters into the physical eye. That's when the eye can start seeing Gashmis. So it's a similar. So you see how the mashal works so well in this context. You're taking a ruchnius dika thing, putting it into a Gashmis dika instrument or channel, and that allows that spiritual flow to begin to relate to the physical. So all this is the process of what the Shivim Zkenim. But it's all rooted and comes from Moshe's Atzmis HaChochma, as we'll continue to read shortly. But I'll not want to stop again, just if there are any questions. So there's a very critical understanding of the whole idea of Atzilus, of Zkenim, Sanhedrin. I mean, it's quite mind-blowing if you think about it, because most people you learn about Sanhedrin and so on, you don't realize the depth of what we're talking about. It's not just a practical thing that Moshe can't do the job alone, so he needs to delegate it to 70 sages. It's actually a whole process that really works extremely understanding, where you have all the levels, like I said, a perfect interface that's like an assembly line, if you wish, that's seamless, but allows us to go step by step by step, all the way to the top, so to speak.
So I have a couple questions. One should be quick. The explanation of the, let's say, spiritual constitution of the Sanhedrin, lack of a better rule, the 70. Just what you said, is that essentially a way of explaining the hashgacha of the malachim, essentially?
No. We're going to get back to that later. You're again jumping ahead. The Rebbe Rashab is not asking us to guess. He spoke about malachim. Now he moved to Sanhedrin, and he's going to get back to malachim.
Because it's all right. Then we move on to the next question. If it takes 70 or 71 human representatives to complete a godly analysis of a matter, let's say of like you said, guilty or not guilty. So then why in our modern day is it enough to have 3 rebutting and a base team?
So first of all, there were 3 those days too, when necessary. 70 is the complete picture. And you could ask the same thing, why is there no Sanhedrin altogether? Because we have no Beis HaMikdash. Today, everything is we're in Golus. So Golus, one of the things the Rambam says when Mashiach comes, is Sanhedrin will return to the Beis Hamikdash. So basically, the 70 is the complete version of it. Like many things like that. You know, why we're not the same generation like Moshe Rabbeinu. The generations have been diminished. So we don't have that level. So the Torah tells us there's a bezin of 3, you could have of 7, of 30, and of 70 is the complete. This is the complete picture, so to speak. He called it Sanhedrin Gdela, matter of fact. So there were different times in history when they couldn't assemble 70. There were times you couldn't bring 70 together. So there were alternatives.
I see. Thank you.
So Moshe is the Isha in Einoi, and the Sanhedrin are the Shiva Einoim.
He didn't say those words yet. So I don't want to say that yet. We'll see what he says. I'm not sure if that you can say it. I don't remember now. We'll read it inside. There's no reason to guess. The Rebbe Rashab is guiding us here very nicely. You know, he's going step by step, and let's see how he says it. He didn't dispel that out yet. You could guess. Listen, if the Hemshech stopped here, you'd have to guess or speculate. I think we should just wait, and we'll see how he spells it out.
I understand. But he also said that the Neshamas are the Isha in Einoi. Besides the
That's
Sanhedrin.
for sure. That's the posuk. Hashem chelik amay, and Avaya chelik amay, and then it says Ishen Einai. That he said, that we know, but he didn't finish yet the discussion. He's still in the middle of the discussion. So far, what he said, Ishen Einai is higher. Einai is higher than the 7 of the Malachim. That's what he said. Now he began to discuss that the Zohar says that the 7 referred to Sanhedrin. He didn't talk yet about Malachim again. He didn't return to Malachim. And he didn't return to Ishen Einai yet. He's discussing it. We're literally in the middle of a discussion here. Okay. So let's continue. The Gam Commission is barely ill. Now, earlier we learned that when Moshe, when it's salti min haruach, asher alecha, when God took and imparted from Moshe's spirit onto the skenim, that was the amshach of atzmis chochma. So there's as the skenim on their own, before that Atzilus, the salti, Batake 70, Mochin sheba Midos. But didn't we learn earlier that then Moshe was mamshech into them atzmis chochma? So he's going to now qualify that. And he says, V'gam commission is barely ill. And also, according to what we learned earlier, we're on page 1401, if you want to look it up. The Ayin Atzilus Ruchish Lamesh Aleim, that the Inyan of the imparting or the emanating of the spirit of Moshe upon the skenim.
Not 1401, 1410.
We're on 1410 right now. Earlier it was 1401. We are now on 1410. What he's mentioned is barely is 1401. Okay? So he says like this, that also what he said there, that the imparting of the spirit of Moshe upon them, what was that? That's what Moshe, that was what imparted them, from atzmis chochma into the Mochin sheba Midos. B'kol Mochin, says the Rebbe Rashab, nevertheless, you cannot compare it la'atzmus ha'chochma mamish. So as much as they received from Moshe atzmus ha'chochma, it's still not the way it is inside Moshe. He remains Moshe. It's not like they became 70 Moshe Rabbeinus. So you can't compare. Shazel b'chinas Muflah mehem. That remains in the b'chinas Muflah mehem, which is Moshe. So in other words, yes, they elevated to a higher level that came from Atzmis Chochma, but that it's still Atzmis Chochma Moshe still remains above them. He wants to just clarify that even based on that, it's still there's still a distinction between them. Okay, and now we'll understand the introduction I gave before. We'll understand the next section now. Omnom. Now, however, Inyan v'tzalti min haruach, this idea that from Tzalti that I imparted from your spirit, or from the spirit upon Moshe to the Skenim, to the Sanhedrin, Zeu k'may hatzilus me'erin sof ha'maitzil. That's like when we say Atzilus, remember, is higher. Atzilus means that from the Ein Ein Sof that's higher than Atzilus, of the emanator, that's what is imparted into Atzilus. Now we've been talking about in Atzilus itself, from Atzmis HaChochma to Mochin Shebemidas, to the 70 Skenim. But the truth is, Vatsalti Min HaRuach begins earlier. It's coming from a higher level than Atzilus. It's coming from Ein Ein Sof HaMaitzil. So how do we fit that into this discussion? So he says like this: So the Savas of Chochma Gluya, revealed conscious Chochma within Atzilus, coming from superconscious Chochma in Kesed. So if you really want to have the exact parallel, and you say Vatsalti, you're emanating from Moshe, Vatsalti, the word Atzilus, from Moshe into Sanhedrin, that's not in Atzilus itself, that's from higher than Atzilus into Chochma Vatzilus. So that's like Kamoy Kenu Inyan Sanhedrin Legabe Moshe. That's the Sanhedrin is like Atzilus, that's receiving from higher than Atzilus. Meaning Chochma in Atzilus, conscious Chochma receiving from Chochma Stima, or we call it Chochma Shebekeser. They'll soon call Chochma Stima. Bimkein, in that analogy, Moshe B'chinas Chochma Stima. Then, according to this, it's not just Atzmis Chochma Vatzilus, it's Chochma Stima. Literally mean concealed Chochma, but we call it supraconscious Chochma because it's not conscious yet. V'zeu b'chinas ha-Muflah sheb Sanhedrin. That's why it's called Muflah. Because Muflah, Pella, is the level of Keser. He's beyond Muflah. The Chochma Stima, he hafla v'harvdola b'chinas Chochma Datzilus. Because Chochma Stima is like a wondrous, an awesome state, v'avdola, and removed from Chochma Vatzilus. So what he's done here is basically moving it all up. It's not a contradiction to what we learned till now, because the bottom line is that he's explaining it in detail. First, he began to explain that the Sanhedrin is Mochin Shebemidas, the 10 spheres within the Midos. Good. They receive now from Moshe's Atzmis HaChochma. So they receive from there. So now he's clarifying what Atzmis HaChochma means. Really, it means from Chochma Stima of Keser, Pella, Muflah. And they receive, and Chochma Vatzilus receives from that, and that's Vatsalti Min HaRuach Asher Alecha, from Moshe's spirit, from Chochma Stima, it's transmitting into Chochma Gluya in Atzilus, but Chochma as it relates to Midas at the end of the day. Now, the difference is, before Vatsalti, the 70 sages, the 70 Skenim were the level of Mochin Shebemidas. Now they're getting from Atzmis HaChochma and ultimately from Chochma Stima, from Moshe. And that's the Chiddush of Atzalti, the Atzilus.
Why Mochin Shebemidas? They were the Chochma, not Chochma Stima. It's Mochin.
Anyway, I explained that earlier. I'm not sure what to say.
No, you said before about Mochin Shebemidas, they are lower than Mochin. Moshe now he said it's Chochma Stima, V'otzalti Min HaRuach to Chochma. So why, right now we're saying that the Sanhedrin is Mochin Shebemidas, which is lower than Chochma.
And then the Atzalti gave them from Atzmis Chochma, which is rooted from Chochma Stima of Moshe.
Okay, so that's Chochma Gluya, that's not Mochin Shebemidas.
That's the Chiddush of Vatsalti, before Vatsalti and after Vatsalti.
So the Mochin Shebemidas are before the Otzalti?
But yeah. They were 70 Skenim before Vatsalti. They just didn't have the Vatsalti yet. And then he concludes, "U'kamoishin is boily ill," as we learned earlier. What did we learn earlier? In the beginning of the Hemshech, B'ascholas, B'tchilas HaDrush, in the beginning of the Drush here referring to Ayin Beis, Hemshech Ayin Beis, B'inyin shtei kachol b'machshava. So in the very early chapters, something like, I think, chapter 12 maybe, or a little later, maybe later than 12. Between 12 and 20, he spoke about shtei kachol b'machshava, that there's a level of silence because it's higher than conscious wisdom, higher than conscious chachmas timah. And he called that hafla of avdallah because you don't understand. That's why God said, be silent. Because there is a chachma behind it, machshava, but it's a machshava that is not accessible to the regular person. So that's how he explains shtei kachol machshava. That's the level of chachma muflah, chachma nifla, hafla of avdallah from chachma datzilis. And that's where Moshe remains obviously superior to the 70 skenim, even after the Chochmah was imparted to them, Batzalti. Okay, now he brings it back to Ishen Einai. So now he's going to say like this. Oh, let me stop if there are any questions before I continue. V'zehu gamken Ishen Einai. And this is also what we're referring to, the pupil of the eye, which means there's an eye, and then there's a pupil of the eye. It doesn't just say they're einai, they're God's eye. The pupil, the eyeball, the babas einai, he used it before the expression. So it's like the jewel of the eye, sometimes they refer to it. So he says, the ayin, the eye itself, hu b'chinas chochma. That's the level of chochma. The ishen einai zeu b'chinas pnimius v'atzmas ha-chochma b'chinas chochmas timah. And ishen einai is referring to a deeper level in the vision, it's in the eye itself, the inner and core of chochma, which is chochmas timah. Here he says it clearly. So, therefore, yes, he connects Moshe Rabbeinu, therefore, to the level of ishen einai. Now you could ask the question, the Pasuk says it on all neshamas, including Sanhedrin, of course. And here we're saying it's exclusively Moshe. So how do you explain that? So that's what we're going to learn later as well, because that's the difference if it's revealed or not revealed. Every year there's Ishen Einai. But as I said, that's the Sheidish HaNeshama. Moshe was in a revealed way by him. He had that direct access. So for him, he was already, in this world, he was Ishen Einai. The rest of Neshamas, it remains, our Etzem is rooted there. But we can't access it necessarily. That's why we need Sanhedrin. That's why we need Einei HaEdah. That's why we need Torah. That's why we need Moshe, for that matter. We need them to direct and guide us. But the goal will ultimately be that the ayin of the neshamas below, the Eidus and Kalim of the vision below, will ultimately become so refined, the Kalim, that they will able to access and reach the Etzem Chochma, which is the level of Ishen Einai of Moshe himself. So do we all have a Moshe within us? Yes, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. So Me'ain, there's Bedakus, there's something all of us have from this level. But still, we're not Moshe Rabbeinu. There's one Moshe. So that's just to round it out. He doesn't say this explicitly, but it's pretty clear that's the meaning behind it all.
Yeah, just shouting about it now. Take a touch it. Okay, so don't do that.
Okay, good. That's the explanation how we understand the context here. Okay. I'll go till the end of the paragraph. But are there any questions before I continue?
This point,
Can't hear
what
you.
he said, he will explain it soon.
Ayin Mashakosav, he continues, but Eid HaChaim. I think this is Eid HaChaim. It's not Eid HaChama. That would be a Pirush on the Zayar. Ayin Mashakosav Eid HaChaim. Al Posuk Ashkifa Memein Kotshacha. Remember the Posuk he brought earlier, that gaze upon us from your holy abode or holy chamber or holy heaven. And he said that's the Koyach Hari Asmo, that's they're connected to Ishen Einai. He said, so the Eid HaChaim on the Pasuk says this. Look there, Sheheir, Ayin Beis zivugim. So the Erechem brings there a Kabbalistic concept. He remarks about two types of zivugim. Let me just explain what a zivug means. A zivug means a union. So you say zivugim, like a shidduch. So Chassidus and Kabbalah, I should say, and Chassidus talks about zivugim, zivug, yichud, are sometimes interchangeable. So you say the zivug, like a male and female, the zivug of Zohar and Malchus. But zivug is a general term that talks about different unifications. There is a distinction between zivug and yuchad. I don't want to go into that right now. But he talks about two types of zivugim. The loy shalim, the zivugah de shalim, hamavur be'etz chaim. So in Eitz Chaim, he talks about two types of zivugim. We learned it earlier, if you recall, on page 12, I have it written down here, 1236 and on. That there's a zivug shalim, the inner shalim, that's not complete. Like you could say a non-consummated union. There's a union, but it's not complete. Either due to golus or due to other reasons. And then there's a zivug shalim, a complete zivug. That's the expression in Eitz Chaim. Two levels of yichud, essentially. The zivuga de loy shalim hu lahachis ha'elemis. Shazel m'chinas chitzenis ha'chochma. So remember, we learned before about the two levels of hashgacha, or even from the Ramaz, that there's a level called, what he said, the Ramaz said, the shefa, that is there loziness ha'elemis, to sustain the world. So let me just use an example. I've used this example a number of times. It's a classic example. You build a home for your family. So obviously there's a commitment to building the home. You want to build it. You're involved in the details. But the home at the end of the day is a means to an end. What you want is a home for your family. You don't need a building just to be a building. So it's important to understand that it's a means to an end. So it says God sustains existence. Of course, he wants to create existence and sustain it. But it's not an end in itself. So the chayas that goes into creating existence, what he's saying is, what you need is enough chayas to sustain it. You don't give it your whole pnimius harotzen in Tanya, which I'm actually teaching now in Perek Chav Gimel. And Perek Chav Gimel 23 talks about pnimius harotzen and his mitzvahs. Whereas chitzenius harotzen is creating the world. Because the world, you're not creating it. That's not your inner intention. Your intention is to have a home for your children or for your family. So there's a certain amount of chayas that you invest in the home. It's like somebody who's working in order to make a living. I'm talking about the way it should be. So they don't put all their life into it. Their life is into their family, into their Torah, into their mitzvahs, into their avodah, into their shlichus in this world. But since Hashem said you have to make a keli b'derech hateva, so you go to work. So you work, but it should be, as it says in Chassidus, b'lei lev v'lev. You have your heart in there because you have to be ethical and honest and sincere in your work. Masa matan b'amuna. You have to be involved, but not all of you. There's a part you reserve for higher purpose. Like the Rebbe Rashab once told a chassid, who was a great chassid, and then he became a wealthy manufacturer of what? Of galoshes. So you can imagine he made a lot of money because those days in the shtetl, there were no paved streets. So shoes would get spoiled. So he was manufacturing galoshes. So it saved many a shoe. The Rebbe Rashab met him once and said to him, "Ich gesehen Füßen Galoshen, aber kein nicht gesehen a Kopf in Galoshen." I saw feet in galoshes, but I never saw a head in galoshes. Because he saw he was so immersed in his business that his head was completely in the galoshes, so to speak. So the point being is, going back to creation, 6 days of the week, it says Hashem created the world. But then it says, Vayichul Hashemayim v'aretz b'chol tzvam, Shabbos menucha. Menucha from what? Hashem didn't have to work hard. But creating the world was not the ultimate purpose. Shabbos is the purpose, to elevate the world into a spiritual place. So yes, he invested enough to create existence, but how much energy goes into it? He says that's a zivugas the inner shalom. lahachisa elemis. It's to sustain the world as much as it needs to exist. Not in any diminished way, but you can't call that it has the whole zivug shalom. He's completely invested his whole, because that's not the ultimate purpose. So it's coming from Chochma. Kulam b'Chochma says God created everything with wisdom. But where's his main wisdom? As we're going to learn in a moment, his main pnimis HaChochma, atzmis HaChochma, chitzenis HaChochma goes into existence. That relates to the Elamus. Mochin Midos, like we learned. Zivuga Shalom, what Zivuga Shalom? Hula Halid Neshamis. The Zivuga Shalom, that's the investment that he makes, the complete union in order to give birth to souls. Souls are his children. Souls is the ultimate purpose. That's a whole different level of commitment and connection. So there's a zivug that's necessary, the loy shalom, some connection you have in the work you do, meaning in this case sustaining existence. But lahel neshama, that comes from zivug shalom. Because that's really coming from what your real chochma you really want. So of course you use your deepest levels of chochma for that.
The Ohr HaChaim is giving here a beautiful explanation. But that's
and
not
that
the
level,
Ohr HaChaim.
That level is mistaklusa the arech ampim b'chochma bina. This comes from, this is in Kabbalistic terminology, is arech ampin, which is in Keser, is gazing at chochma bina ubezo malchus ubezun ubezo v'nukva. As we learned earlier at length, as I said, page 1236 and on, and also on page 1400 he spoke about it. There's two levels. So here, now we're talking about zivug shalom. Why is that zivug? Because here is completely immersed, and it's the gazing of arech ampin into chochma bina zoh malchus, so the yichud is a complete one. Zehu ha'ashkafa v'hashgacha shal neshamas Yisrael. This is the Ashkifa Memein Kotchecha. Ubeidach Samchi Yisrael, the gazing and the supervision on the Neshamas Yisrael, which is higher than the Ashgacha and Ashgacha on the rest of existence. The B'chinas Atzmus HaChochma Shezeh B'chinas Ishein Einoi. From the core Chochma, which is the level of the pupil of the eye that he's been talking about. So you see here, he brings together all this whole ideas. We have the two levels, and now this, of course, is higher than the Ashgacha of the Malachim, which he's going to speak about later. He's going to get back to it, but we have now this this contrast. I think so. I'm going to stop here. Let me take any questions.
It's
There's
not
more to
the
come.
Ohr HaChaim.
There's another paragraph where he's going to explain this idea more in detail, and keep in mind that all this is based on the Maimer. As I said, it's a maimer from the Alter Rebbe in Tovkuf Samach Vov called Yiseva Vena on this pasuk with Ishenenai. So a lot of this is, I mean, most of it the Rebbe Rashab wrote, but it's based on certain places he actually quotes from that maimer, and with that Tzemach Tzedek Sagos on it to explain it. But the Rebbe Rashab, of course, developed it, and that is the context of it. But it's far from over because there's still more to talk about. So what is how neshamas come down below, etc. But he's slowly developing it. And as I explained also, the bigger context connecting to the interface, why you do need both hashgachas, because essentially it's like das alien and das tachten, though he doesn't use those words. But it's like the divine that relates to existence and the divine beyond existence. Okay, I'll stop here. Any questions?
It's not the Ohr HaChaim. I just checked in the Ohr HaChaim. He's saying a very beautiful explanation, and similar to that, he's talking about there is te ashpoas lemailo, ashpoas ruchnius, nefoshes atehoirois, when ashpoas atoiv lechayis anivroim, that way it's called zivug, but he's not using this l'sheines from David.
Does he use the word zivug? Does he use the word zivug?
He said, shekol sheyesh b'vchinas mashpia, b'vchinas nishpa, yiskanu b'shem zivug. That's the only thing.
Okay, so the Rebbe Rashab is not quoting, but the Teichen is there.
Yeah, but could be that the zivug shlim, this is from Ohr HaChaim maybe.
Ohr HaChaim is not on the Psukim. Ohr HaChaim is on Zohar. He wouldn't say Ohr HaChaim ala Pasuk. That's why I said it's the Eid HaChaim. What you just said to me is the Eid HaChaim. The Rebbe Rashab is paraphrasing. Doesn't have to say the exact line. He's saying once he says the word zivug, it's pretty much this. I'll look inside, but probably the Teichen from Eid HaChaim. I don't think it's Eid HaChama, because Eid HaChama would be on the Zoyar, unless it's on a Zoyar on Pasuk HaShkifa. I don't think so, but I would have to look it up. And once the Eid HaChaim says zivug, it sounds to me that's what the Rebbe Rashab is referring to. But
he's also saying
he's quoting the Eid HaChaim, but the Eid HaChaim was a makubal. He knew Kabbalah.
Yeah. He's also saying שהכוסוב יויר סויד אחד, והוא כי העוד הוא הכין שתי השפויס למיילו.
There you go. So it's the Eid HaChaim. He's just saying it, not exactly. Look, he doesn't say Zel Shene. He just quotes it. So I'm almost sure it's that.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there any questions on what we learned today? All good? Okay. Nice piece. So we'll stop here, end of the paragraph, bottom of 1410. Let's stop the